Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Daily reading of Lord Meher, the biography of the Avatar of the Age Meher Baba, Volume 1 by Bahu Kalchuri, page number 8. After a while, Baba Jan was never found alone, but always surrounded by a crowd. Her physical needs were practically nil, and she seldom ate. She was fond of tea, however, and her followers would bring cup after cup for her, which she would offer as prasad. If someone happened to bring flowers, she would abuse the person for wasting money, criticizing, "Why didn't you spend your money wisely on something like sweets or tea, which all can enjoy? What good are these flowers?" If Babajan happened to look at someone who was passing by, the person would stand transfixed. We are continuing the reading on the chapter on Hazrat Babajan the Emperor, and this is the page number 8. If Babajan happened to look at someone who was passing by, the person would stand transfixed, glazing at her divine face. Restaurant owners and fruit vendors would beg her to visit and offer her whatever she wanted. If Babajan happened to comply, they would consider themselves fortunate in God's eyes. When Babajan went to the Pune cantonment area, she frequently visited the house of a Muslim named Sheikh Imam, a watchmaker. Seeing her ragged clothes, the Sheikh's mother wished to bathe and dress Babajan in her new clothes, but she always refused. One day, however, Babajan agreed, and with the utmost difficulty and patience, the Sheikh's mother gently bathed her old body and attired her in a new clean robe and undergarments especially stitched for her. This was the last bath Babajan was to have for as long as she lived. But despite this, her body was always fragrant. It was free from impurities of the world, as if it were always bathed in the wine of love that flowed from her intoxicated lips and eyes. Having no permanent place to stay in Pune, Babajan would rest alongside any street at night. Once she stayed near the Muslim shrine of Wakadia Bagh, and from there went to sit for some time near another Muslim shrine, Panchpir at Dagi. There were many ant colonies near Panchpir's shrine, and the ants would swarm over Babajan, biting her and causing large welts on her body. Yet she remained quietly seated as if nothing had happened. One day, a man named Qasim V. Rafai went to Diggi, and upon seeing Babajan covered with ants, tears ran down his cheeks. Qasim, with Babajan's permission, attempted to remove all the ants, but he was not successful. Somehow, he persuaded Babajan to come to his house, where with much difficulty he removed hundreds of the tiny ants, one by one. Throughout this painful ordeal, Babajan barely indicated any discomfort. After temporarily staying at several different places throughout the city of Pune, Babajan took up residence under a neem tree near Bukhari Shah's mosque in Rasta Pet. The mosque was next door to the home of a devotee named Sardar Raste. Larger crowds began to congregate there, and Babajan was hampered by the limited space around her. Her devoted followers implored her to change her seat, but Babajan sternly replied, "One devil is here, and unless and until I get rid of him, it is not possible for me to move an inch." Opposite her chosen site was a large banyan tree, and when the municipality chopped down the tree to expand the road, Babajan suddenly decided to move. For 2 weeks she was seen near a deserted tomb to the Swar Gate locality, and from there she shifted to the area called Char Baudi, Four Wells, on Malcolm Tank Road, where she sat beneath a neem tree. This spot proved to be her final site, where she remained for many years until the ancient woman discarded her form. When Babajan first moved to Char Baudi, there was just a dirt road infested with hordes of mosquitoes. Plague germs were even suspected there. During the day, the area was desolate and deserted. but at night it sprang to life with thieves and the city's most dangerous criminals who met there. In Charbaudi, Babajan remained seated under the neem tree, a rock of absolute godhood in the shifting dust of pitiful ignorance moving about her. After months of exposure to nature's elements, she grudgingly allowed her devotees to build a shelter of gunny sacks above her. Here she stayed throughout all seasons, elevating humanity's suffering by allowing anyone to come to her to sip the wine of her continual presence. Several years later, there was a marvelous change in the locality. Large modern buildings were constructed, tea shops and restaurants appeared, and electricity was brought to the homes in the area. Due to the establishment of Babajan's seat under the neem tree, Four Wells became a charming area in which to live and raise a family. No one can escape the light of illumination when one nears its source. Even when veiled, one feels the effect of his light. Its flame burns away the veil. Such was the light of Babajan in her and around her. The court of Babajan was on the street. Qawwalis were sung around her. Crowds came and bowed to her as an emperor. The fragrance of flowers wafted all sides. The sweets burning the incense purified the air. Those who received her darshan and were blessed by her thanked God for the rare good fortune. On one occasion in 1919, Babajan forewarned the large group gathered around her, all should leave immediately for your homes. Go. Her wishes were respected, but no one understood why she was so insistent on sending them away. Shortly thereafter, however, strong winds with heavy rains swept through Pune, causing terrible damage throughout the city. Babajan's devotees begged her to come to their homes for shelter, but she refused to move from under the tree and sent them away. Although she saw to the safety of others, she herself withstood the rigors of the furious storm. Gradually, the ancient woman's fame spread, and Muslims, Hindus, and Zoroastrians from different places came for her darshan. Chaur Baudi became a holy place of pilgrimage, and Babajan poured wine onto the sincere. After meeting the old holy lady, a person's heart was content and grateful. Day after day, the number of devotees increased, and Babajan was worshipped and revered by thousands throughout India. The British military authorities were annoyed at finding the road near Babajan's blocked with traffic and surging crowds every day. The authorities were helpless, however, to do anything about it because they knew that if Babajan was forcibly removed, there would be an uproar which would not easily subside. It became apparent that a strong permanent shelter needed to be erected for the old woman. Initial funds were provided by the British military, but when the new shelter was finished, Babajan obstinately refused to shift since it had been constructed a few feet away from her original seat. So the structure was extended at additional cost to the city city authorities to cover her seat under the neem tree. But again she refused to sit under it. When her devotees pleaded with her, at last she consented, muttering her bitter complaints that it was not quite right. Babajan's nature was majestic. She was an emperor in a fakir's rags. Although between 120 and 130 years old, Babajan's wrinkled face was still like a blossoming rose, and the expression in her brown blue eyes would draw anyone to look at her more closely. It is said that her gaze had driven some mad for God. She was somewhat stooped and stooped and short in height, but her gait was of one intoxicated. Her skin was white, her wrinkles were deep as if carved. Her crown of soft hair was pure white, and curls fell at her shoulders. Her voice was uncommonly sweet and pleasing to the ear. She did not beg, although she lived as a simple fakir. She possessed only what she wore, but her simplicity held invaluable and untold treasure. Seated in the street, she had become like dust. No one knew that she had been raised as a princess and had renounced her royal heritage. Her renunciation showed that by her life of utter purity she had gained priceless divine wealth. Inside her was hidden everything. It was this divine inheritance, kutubiyat, perfect mastery, that she consecrated to the world. Whether in winter or summer, Babajan would dress in loose white cotton pants with a long white tunic. A shawl always lay across her shoulders, and besides these humble garments, she wore no other protection against the elements. Her heart was always bare, her hair was never washed, combed, or oiled. When she walked down the streets, her stride was swift like that of a young girl's. While she listened to devotional music, her body would rock to the rhythm of its melody. Babajan's physical condition changed frequently. One day she would have a high fever, and the next day, without taking any medication, she would be fine. She would address everyone, whether young or old, man or woman, as child or Baba. If any person would call her Mai, she would grimace and rebuke them. I am not man. I am a man, I am not a woman. This strange declaration of hers was faithful to the words of the Prophet Muhammad, who said, a lover of the God is a woman, a lover of paradise is a eunuch, and a lover of God is a man. People would therefore affectionately call her Amma Sahib, meaning mother, and sir at the same time. Miracles were associated with Babajan. She was a physician in her own unusual manner. If someone sick approached her for relief, she would utter, this child is suffering due to pills. Pills really meant that the person suffered from the sanskaras of his or her action. Babajan would take hold of the painful part of the person's body and would mysteriously call to an imaginary soul. She would also shake the affected part 2 or 3 times and tell the cause the sanskaras to go. The method of treatment inevitably cured the sufferer of his or her complaint. One day, a Zoroastrian child who had completely lost his sight was brought to Babajan. She took the child in her arms, mumbled some incantations, and then blew her uh, breath upon the child's eyes. Immediately, the child regained his vision and jumped out of her lap, joyfully crying, I can see, I can see. Want to read?
Yeah.
From here.
Babajan lived a poor, homeless fakir. Babajan lived as a poor, homeless fakir on the street. But out of reverence, her devotees would bring her expensive cloth or jewelry as gifts. Babajan was indifferent towards such material offerings, but thieves would slyly snatch the cloth or jewelry away. Some would even steal from her while she washed. Babajan never tried to stop them. Once Babajan was seemingly sleeping under her tree covered by a fine shawl. A thief struck up and, seeing the shawl, was tempted to steal it. But as the corner of the shawl was under Babajan's body, to pull it out was risky. The thief was wondering how to manage it when at the moment Babajan turned over. Taking advantage of her changed position, the thief grabbed the shawl and ran away. In this way, Babajan helped the thief, who was never caught, fulfill his desire. On another occasion, a devotee from Bombay brought Babajan 2 expensive gold bangles, and after bowing down to her, put them on her wrist. The man told her that though her past blessing would some worldly desire of his had been fulfilled, and as a token of appreciation, he has brought the bangles for her. The man had no idea of her indifference to them. One night, soon after, a robber crept up behind Babajan and roughly forced the bangles off, causing her wrist to bleed. The robber attempted to speedy escape but people nearby, witnessing this incident, shouted for help. Hearing their cries, a policeman came and inquired about the uproar. But what did Babajan do? The old woman startled the crowd gathering by raising a stick and exclaiming, "Arrest those people who are shouting. It is they who are disturbing me. Take them away." Babajan was seldom seen eating. A man was appointed as her majuar, whose duty was to look after her personal needs and to serve her. He was a good humored person, and whenever he would ask Babajan to eat, he would jokingly say, "Amma Sahib, the jodna patch on the cloth is ready now." This referred to Babajan's constant protest that eating was like patching a torn cloth, meaning that ingesting food was similar to patching this cloth of a body to preserve it. Babajan would constantly mutter seemingly incoherent phrases such as, "Vermin are troubling me incessantly. I brush them away, but they gather again." She would vigorously brush her body as if removing dust or cobwebs. Perfect masters such as Babajan have their own inner way of working. For example, one night in the town of Telegao, about 20 miles from Pune, a play was being staged in a local theatre. There was a large crowd and theatre was packed to capacity. Seating was sold out and the management locked the doors to prevent people from entering. During the play, a fire broke out and the audience panicked since the doors were locked. Simultaneously in Pune, Babajan was observed to be behaving quite strangely. She began restlessly pacing back and forth, quite excitedly, and angrily shouted, "Fire, fire. The doors are locked and people are going to burn. You damn fire, extinguish." The people around her could not understand what was happening, but in Telegao, as people there later related, suddenly the doors of the theatre flew open and the panicked crowd rushed out, averting a horrible tragedy. The perfect masters' ways are unique as well as curious. The boundlessness of their spiritual work is outside the limits of rational human understanding. One example of this is the following incident. Although Babajan had an aversion to presents of jewelry, she kept tight, gaudy, rights on her fingers which she would never remove. She kept gaudy rings on her fingers which she would never remove. One ring was so tight that her finger began to swell and deep wound developed. Maggots crawled in and out of the wound. When the worms would fall off, Babajan would pick them up and placing them back on the wound utter, "My children, feed and be at ease." Naturally, people tried to take her to a doctor, but she always refused, not even agreeing to let doctor come to her and treat the infection, and consequently gangrene set in and the finger wasted away and fell off. The wound healed on her hand, but seeing her condition, the ancient woman's devotees would shed tears and she would scold them, saying, "Why do you weep? I enjoy the suffering." Babajan was generous towards the ailing and destitute. If a hungry man came to her, she would hand him her own food. In the winter, if a shivering man approached her, she would give her shawl to him. But once an exception was observed in her generosity. It was a bitter cold one night and an old man, shaking pitiably, came to her. He had a severe cold and high fever and prayed to Babajan to cure him by her nazar gaze. Babajan, however, became furious and angrily snatched away the thin blanket wrapped around his shoulder, which was his sole scanty protection against the cold. After this, Babajan ignored him and the old man quietly sat to spend the bitter night besides her. However, by morning, he was feeling unusually strong and looked healthy and happily left fully recovered. Babajan would usually speak in Pashto or Persian and frequently utter the names of Persian poets Hafiz and Amir Khusro. She would often quote these couplets: "Despite millions of learned pundits and thousands of wise men, Only God understands his own way of working. Wonderful is your creation, O God, wonderful is your game. You poured jasmine oil on the head of a shrew. Sometimes she mentioned different saints or masters, and she would remark particularly about Tajuddin Baba. Taj is my Khalifa, supreme ruler or successor. What Taj gives, he gets from me. On August 17, 1925, at midnight, Babajan suddenly exclaimed, "My poor fakir Taj has gone." No one could understand what she meant, but next morning, when the newspapers carried out story of Tajuddin Baba's demise in Nagpur, people grasped the significance of her utterance. Babajan resided continuously on the streets of Pune for almost 26 years, during which time thousands of hearts were wounded by the dagger of her glance. Around her was an unseen fire where all kinds of impressions hovered and burned. In May 1913, her flame also kissed the light of the age. Merwan Shehryar Irani, whom Babajan always called my beloved son, to unveil Merwan in her mission, it was for her beloved son that Babajan had travelled to Pune from the Punjab so many years before. Her seat under the neem tree was just a few streets away from his home. Often she would see him pass by, walking with his friends, but she waited many years before she embraced him. People would see her weeping, and when they inquired why, she would reply, "I weep out of love for my son." This statement was astounding because it was inconceivably for this old woman fakir to have given birth to a child. With tears in her intoxicating eyes, she would utter, "One day my son will come. He will come and shake the world." No one had any idea what her words meant. Babajan's physical presence on earth lasted between 130 to 141 years. On September 18, 1931, one of Babajan's fingers was operated on at Sassoon Hospital, but afterwards the ancient woman did not appear to be recovering, and a few days before she dropped her body, Babajan muttered, "It is time for me to leave now. The work is over. I must close the shop." One of her devotees pleaded, "Do not say such things, Babajan. We need you with us." With a quizzical gaze, she replied, Nobody wants me, where's? Nobody can afford the price. I have turned my goods over to the proprietor." On September 21, 1931, at 4:27 in the afternoon, Hazrat Babajan dropped her body. People were speechless when they learnt that this ancient woman had died. Tears flowed throughout Pune. Gloom hung over the city as if clouds had become her shawl. Thousands of people joined the funeral procession for her last journey through the streets of Pune. Babajan was buried under the same neem tree where she sat so many years, and people still come to her tomb every day. Although Babajan is sleeping in her tomb, her devotees know that she is always awake in their hearts. O Babajan, our loving, full-hearted homage to you. Your kiss awakened the awakener and gave him his bliss. Start with Narayan Maharaj, the Lord of the Heart. The little boy who was an orphan in the eyes of the world became the king of creation. This boy was not Narayan, God, in the name only, but he became Narayan, conscious God, who knows how many received the wine of divine love from the glance, how many he guided in the path to realizing Narayan. A middle-aged Hindu named Bhim Rao lived in the village of Sindgi in the city of Bijapur in southern India. Bhim Rao had a deeply religious mind, and his wife Lakshmi which means wealth, was a wealth itself through her devotion. Until he was 34 years old, Bhimrao and his wife were childless, and this was a disappointing aspect of their marriage. However, happiness came to their home on May 25, 1885, when a son, whom they named Narayan, Lord of the Heart, was born to them. The parents' joy knew no bounds, but the father's joy was short-lived, for when Narayan was only 14 months old, Bhimrao suddenly became mortally ill and died. Lakshmi Rao was overcome with bereavement, and were it not her responsibility of looking after her son Narayan, she would have passed away with grief. Although a widow, her destiny was to care for her son. Amidst her sorrow from the loss of her husband and the joy from her young son Narayan, Lakshmi bore her burden courageously. After Bhimrao's death, his brother Kashyapa took Lakshmi and Narayan to the city of Bagalkot, but misfortune in one form or the other destined. When Narayan was only 5 years old, his mother died suddenly, leaving him an orphan. Narayan's parental grandmother lived in Nargun, where she had a small piece of land. She had no other grandchildren, so after a year with his uncle Kashyapa, Narayan went to stay with her. Although Narayan seemed like a normal child playing with other children of the village, even at a young age, his thoughts were God. From the age of 6, he would visit the Hindu temple of Lord Venkatesh daily for darshan of the deity therein. The young boy would fervently participate in the ceremonial bhajans, devotional songs and kirtans, Marathi hymns, and this serious devotional tendency was noticed and respected by the temple priests. One day, while playing with his companions in the forest outside the village, Narayan and his friends climbed a nearby hill. They discovered a cave and dared one another to enter. The curious group of playmates ventured inside but soon became frightened and ran out, as the cave was pitch dark. Only Narayan stayed inside and explored deeper into the cave. His playmates thought he was lost inside, but Narayan wandered for several days in its passageways until he found some carved step which descended into a hollow room. At the bottom, he found a naked yogi absorbed in deep meditation. As Narayan sat before him, the yogi slowly came out of his trance and opened his eyes to behold the boy. After bowing to him, Narayan returned, much to the amazement of his friends and elders. We will stop here today, page 14, and resume on page 15 with Baba's grace tomorrow. Avatar Meher Baba ki jai. Avatar Meher Baba ki jai. Avatar Meher Baba ki jai.